It was a cold, crisp autumn evening in Montana, the kind where your breath plumes in front of you and the scent of pine needles hangs heavy in the air. I remember it vividly because it was the night my life truly began, though it felt like it was ending. Jessica, my girlfriend of 5 years, sat across from me at her parents' ornate dining table, her perfectly manicured hand resting on her father's arm. Mr. Thompson, a man whose wealth was as expansive as his ego, had just asked me about my career aspirations. "I'm planning to buy a ranch, sir," I'd said, my voice steady despite the knot forming in my stomach. "Start small, maybe some cattle, work my way up." A silence descended, thick and suffocating, before it was shattered by a snort from Mr. Thompson. Then a chuckle, low and disbelieving, that quickly escalated into a full-blown laugh. Jessica joined him, a delicate giggle at first, then a full, uninhibited peal of mirth. Her eyes, once so warm and loving, were now filled with a dismissive amusement that pierced me deeper than any insult. "A rancher, Mark? Seriously?" she choked out between laughs. "You, with your background?" Their laughter echoed in the spacious dining room, bouncing off the polished mahogany and the crystal chandelier. It wasn't just about my ambition, it was about my modest upbringing, my lack of family connections in their affluent world. I felt a flush creep up my neck, a mix of shame and a fierce, burning resolve. In that moment, surrounded by their mocking mirth, something shifted inside me. The dream of a ranch, once a quiet aspiration, solidified into an unshakable conviction. Their laughter wasn't just a sound, it was the fuel for a fire that would consume my old life and forge a new one. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, and without another word walked out into the biting Montana night, the echoes of their derision ringing in my ears. The drive from their sprawling estate back to my small, rented apartment was a blur of raw emotion. The anger was a hot, pulsating core in my chest, but beneath it, a profound sadness lingered. 5 years. 5 years of shared dreams, whispered promises, and what I thought was unwavering support. Jessica had always claimed to love my quiet ambition, my grounded nature. Now it felt like a betrayal. The city lights of Billings blurred into streaks as I sped down the highway, the windows down despite the biting cold, hoping the frigid air would clear my head. I replayed the scene in my mind, Mr. Thompson's sneer, Jessica's patronizing gaze. It wasn't just their disbelief, it was the casual cruelty, the assumption that my aspirations were laughable because they didn't align with their definition of success. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. This wasn't just about proving them wrong, it was about proving to myself that I wasn't just some fool with a pipe dream. When I finally pulled into my apartment complex, the silence of my small living room was deafening. I threw my keys onto the counter, the jingle sounding like a foreign intrusion. The city felt suffocating, a constant reminder of the life I was supposed to want, but didn't. I knew then that I couldn't stay. The open spaces of Montana, the very land they scoffed at, were calling to me. I pulled out my laptop, the screen reflecting my determined face, and started searching for land, for grants, for anything that could turn this painful humiliation into a tangible future. The urban hum outside my window, once a comforting lull, now felt like a cage. The cold outside was nothing compared to the chill of their dismissal, but that chill was also a catalyst. My savings were meager, a collection of odd jobs and careful budgeting over the years. It wasn't enough to buy a grand ranch, but it was enough to lease a small plot of land an hour's drive outside Bozeman, a forgotten corner with a dilapidated barn and a small, run-down cabin. The air there felt different, cleaner, filled with the scent of sagebrush and damp earth. It was a world away from the manicured lawns of the Thompson estate, and that suited me just fine. The first few months were brutal. I learned to fix fences under the scorching summer sun, the sweat stinging my eyes. I wrestled with stubborn machinery, my hands calloused and perpetually grimy. The cabin had no running water for weeks, and I relied on bottled water and a nearby well. There were days when I questioned my sanity, days when the exhaustion was so profound, I just wanted to lie down in the dirt and give up. I remembered Jessica's perfect hair, her father's expensive suit, and a fresh wave of determination would wash over me. My only companion was a stray dog I'd found wandering near the property, a scruffy mutt I named Rusty. He followed me everywhere, a silent, loyal shadow, and his presence was a surprising comfort in the vast solitude. I started with a small herd of 5 Angus cows, purchased with nearly every dollar I had. Every morning I woke before dawn, the crisp air biting at my skin, and tended to them, learning their rhythms, their needs. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time I felt a sense of purpose that transcended anyone else's expectations. The vast open skies of Montana became my witness, and the physical labor, though taxing, was a balm to my wounded spirit. Just when I thought I was hitting a wall, both financially and emotionally, a stroke of luck, or perhaps fate, intervened. I was at the local feed store haggling over the price of hay when an older gentleman with a weathered face and kind eyes struck up a conversation. His name was Roy, and he'd been ranching in the area for over 50 years. He saw the determination in my eyes, the desperation, and offered a helping hand. Roy didn't offer handouts. He offered knowledge. He taught me about rotational grazing, about reading the weather, about the subtle signs of a healthy herd. He showed me how to repair machinery I thought was beyond saving, and introduced me to other local ranchers who, despite their initial skepticism, began to offer advice and support. There was a camaraderie among them, a shared understanding of the hardships and rewards of working the land, something I'd never experienced in the corporate world of Jessica's family. One evening, after helping me mend a particularly stubborn fence, Roy looked out at my small growing herd, a faint smile on his lips. "You've got grit, son," he said, his voice raspy. "That's worth more than all the money in the world out here." His words were a balm to my soul, a validation I hadn't realized I craved. Slowly, painstakingly, my operation began to stabilize. I expanded my herd, reinvested profits into better equipment, and even managed to hire a young, enthusiastic ranch hand named Miguel, who reminded me of my own initial hunger to learn. The land, once a daunting challenge, was slowly becoming my ally, and the community, my unexpected family. The turning point came with the severe winter storm. It hit unexpectedly, a brutal blizzard that trapped us on the ranch for days, cutting off power and roads. Many of the older ranchers predicted heavy losses, fearing for their livestock. But because of Roy's earlier advice and my meticulous preparation, my herd was safe and sheltered. I'd spent weeks reinforcing the barn, stocking up on extra feed, and ensuring all the animals had adequate protection. While other ranchers struggled, sending out desperate calls for help when the roads finally cleared, my operation emerged relatively unscathed. This resilience didn't go unnoticed. The local newspaper ran a small piece on my success, highlighting my methodical approach and the care I put into my animals. Soon after, larger distributors, impressed by my quality and consistent supply, started reaching out. The orders came in steadily, then in a flood. I invested in more land, cautiously at first, then more aggressively as the demand grew. I brought in new breeds, implemented sustainable practices, and even started exploring direct-to-consumer sales, cutting out the middlemen. The daily grind was still intense, but it was a different kind of intensity now, one fueled by growth and opportunity, not desperation. The once dilapidated cabin was renovated, the barns expanded, and the small forgotten plot of land had transformed into a thriving enterprise. I still remembered the feeling of their laughter, but now it felt distant, a fading echo against the roar of my own success. The biting wind of the blizzard, once a threat, had become a testament to my preparedness, solidifying my reputation in the community. Years passed. My ranch, now simply known as the Iron Horse, became synonymous with quality and ethical practices in the region. My cattle were renowned, my land holdings had expanded exponentially, and my profits were beyond anything I could have imagined back in those desperate early days. I even managed to purchase the very land Roy had initially helped me lease. The daily routine was still demanding, but it was now a well-oiled machine, supported by a dedicated team. My daily earnings had soared, sometimes reaching $20,000. I had built a new life, a new identity, one rooted in the very earth that had once seemed so unforgiving. The memory of Jessica and her father had receded, replaced by the satisfaction of hard work and genuine achievement. I was content, focused on my business and the community I had come to cherish. I hadn't sought out their world, nor did I particularly care to. Then came the invitation. It was for a major agricultural exposition in Denver, a prestigious event where the biggest names in the industry gathered. My ranch was being honored for its innovative, sustainable practices. I almost declined, preferring my quiet life, but Roy insisted. "It's time the world sees what you've built, Mark," he'd said, his eyes twinkling. I agreed, packed a suit I hadn't worn in years, and made the journey. As I walked into the grand hall, the murmurs of recognition followed me. My name was being whispered, not with ridicule but with respect. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was about to step onto a stage, not to prove myself, but to simply exist as the man I had become, a rancher who had indeed made something out of nothing. The exposition was a whirlwind of handshakes, interviews, and accolades. I spoke on panels, shared my story, and met countless people who genuinely admired what I had accomplished. It was validating, hearing their praise and seeing their respect. But even amidst the applause, I felt a slight disconnect. My heart wasn't truly in the polished convention hall. It was back on the ranch, with the lowing cattle, the sprawling fields under the wide-open sky, and the scent of fresh earth. As I walked off stage after a particularly long Q&A session, still fielding a few lingering questions, a figure moved through the thinning crowd, catching my eye with an unexpected familiarity. It was Jessica. She looked different. Not in a bad way exactly, but the polished sheen I remembered, that almost artificial glow of privilege, was gone. It was replaced by a softer, more subdued demeanor, a subtle weariness around her eyes. She was with a man, presumably her husband, who stood a few paces behind her, looking utterly bored and distracted, scrolling disinterestedly through his phone. Their dynamic was starkly different from the vibrant, intertwined energy Jessica and I once shared, even in our arguments. Her eyes, wide with surprise and perhaps a touch of recognition, met mine across the bustling room. For a moment, amidst the ambient hum of conversations and distant chatter, time seemed to stand still. The old pain, dulled and faded by years of hard-won success, flickered for an instant. But it was fleeting, a dying ember. What replaced it was a quiet, unshakable confidence, a profound sense of self-assurance forged in the solitude and relentless challenges of ranch life. She started to make her way toward me, a hesitant, almost fragile smile on her lips, her hand half raised as if to greet me. But before she could get too close, I was already being pulled in another direction by an eager young reporter, microphone poised. I offered a curt nod in her general direction, a polite acknowledgement, nothing more, and moved on with the flow of the crowd. There was no triumph in the gesture, no lingering bitterness or desire for revenge. Just a simple, almost detached recognition of a past that no longer held any sway over me. The encounter was brief, lasting only a few seconds, almost an afterthought in the grand scheme of the day, but it served as a subtle, almost poetic reminder of just how far I had come, not just professionally, but personally. A few weeks after the exposition, when the buzz had died down and I was fully immersed back in the daily rhythms of the ranch, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, a New York area code, a stark contrast to the local Montana numbers I usually saw. I almost didn't answer, dismissing it as a telemarketer, but something, a faint whisper of curiosity, compelled me. "Hello?" I said, my voice naturally gruff from years of shouting over machinery and wind. "Mark, is that really you?" The voice on the other end was hesitant, almost fragile, completely unlike the confident, sometimes sharp tone I remembered. It was Jessica. My name, spoken by her after so many years, felt alien, a sound from a different lifetime. A strange, complex mix of emotions washed over me in that instant. Surprise, certainly. A flicker of curiosity, wondering why she was calling after all this time. And then, a faint, almost imperceptible echo of the old hurt, a phantom ache from a wound long healed. "Jessica," I replied, my tone carefully neutral, betraying none of the internal churn. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" There was a long, uncomfortable pause on her end, punctuated by a soft, wavering sigh. "I saw you at the expo," she finally began, her voice gaining a little more strength, though still tinged with a raw vulnerability. You look incredible, Mark, truly. And what you've done with your ranch, it's genuinely amazing. Dad and I, we were wrong. So incredibly wrong about everything." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, betraying a deeper emotional turmoil. She went on to explain how her life hadn't turned out as she expected, how the grand plans had crumbled. Her marriage was failing, her father's once thriving business was struggling under new economic pressures, and the high-flying, glamorous life she'd chased had left her feeling empty, unfulfilled, and profoundly unhappy. She started to reminisce, bringing up old memories, shared jokes, lazy Sunday afternoons, the easy comfort we once had before ambition and wealth drove a wedge between us. It was a stark contrast to the dismissive laughter I remembered so vividly from that fateful dinner. She was no longer the confident, slightly arrogant woman I had known. She was vulnerable, almost desperate for a connection, for understanding. "I know it's a lot to ask," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper, imbued with a desperate plea. "But I miss you, Mark. I miss us. Could we talk? Maybe reconnect somehow?" The question hung in the air, loaded with unspoken hopes and regrets. I agreed to talk, not out of any lingering romantic feelings, those embers had long since turned to ash, but out of a simple, adult desire for closure. We met a few days later at a quiet cafe in Bozeman, far from the ranch, far from any reminders of our shared past. She was still beautiful, undeniably so, but the years had etched subtle lines of worry and fatigue around her eyes, revealing a depth of experience I hadn't seen before. She spoke openly, laying bare her unhappiness, the relentless pressure from her father to maintain appearances, and the stark reality of a life built on superficial values that ultimately brought her no joy. Her voice was laced with genuine regret as she recounted how their company had faced severe financial difficulties, how the illusion of their perfect world had shattered, and her own profound personal struggles with loneliness and dissatisfaction. "I remember that night at dinner," she said, her gaze fixed on her coffee cup as if examining the patterns there held the answers to her past mistakes. "Dad and I, we were so incredibly caught up in our own world, our own narrow expectations of what success looked like. We couldn't see beyond the corporate titles and the endless money. We dismissed your dream, your passion for the ranch, because it wasn't our dream, and I regret that every single day, Mark, more than you could possibly know." She finally looked up, her eyes brimming with unshed tears, her vulnerability raw. "I know I probably don't deserve it, given how I acted, but I wanted to apologize, truly, from the bottom of my heart, and to tell you how incredibly proud I am of what you've built. You followed your heart, you endured, and look at you now, a success on your own terms, with something real and meaningful." She then pleaded directly for a second chance, for a return to what we once had, even hinting at a desire to somehow be part of my new life. It was clear she was desperate, not just for a relationship, but for a connection to the genuine, grounded life she had once scorned. The air hung heavy with her unspoken hopes, her quiet desperation, a poignant contrast to the lightness and freedom I felt within myself. Her plea hung in the air between us, a ghost of a past I had long since laid to rest, embalmed in memory but devoid of emotional power. I looked at Jessica, truly looked at her, and saw not the woman who had laughed at my dreams years ago, but simply a person adrift, searching desperately for something real and authentic amidst the wreckage of her own expectations. The anger and hurt I once felt were completely gone, replaced by a quiet sense of empathy for her obvious pain. But there was no romantic spark, no flicker of desire to rekindle what had been. My heart was no longer hers. It belonged irrevocably to the vast open expanse of my ranch, to the steady rhythm of the land, and to the fulfilling life I had built with my own calloused hands. "Jessica," I began, my voice gentle but undeniably firm, leaving no room for misinterpretation. I appreciate your honesty and your apology. It truly means a lot to hear it, even after all this time. What you and your father said that night, it did hurt me deeply at the time. But in a strange, ironic way, it was the exact catalyst I needed. It pushed me, fueled me, to chase this dream with everything I had, to prove myself, not just to you, but to myself. And for that I am genuinely grateful. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle between us. But we're different people now, Jessica. So incredibly different. The life I've built here, on this land, it's everything I ever wanted. It's real, it's honest, it's meaningful, and most importantly, it's mine. There's simply no room for what was, not anymore. I explained that while I genuinely wished her well in finding her own path and happiness, my future was clear, and it didn't include revisiting our past or attempting to resurrect a dead relationship. She nodded slowly, her eyes still watery, but there was a flicker of genuine understanding there now, a quiet acceptance. As I left the cafe, stepping out into the warm Montana sun, a profound sense of peace settled over me. The mocking laughter that had once defined my darkest, most humiliating moment was now a faint, distant echo, completely drowned out by the vibrant symphony of my successful present. I had not only proven them wrong in the most undeniable way, but I had built a life that was rich, deeply meaningful, and authentically mine on my own terms. I was a rancher, making a substantial living, surrounded by the raw beauty of nature and the unwavering loyalty of good people, and that, truly, was all the validation I ever needed. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more content like it, subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us create more engaging and inspiring stories.